It was a summer of infinite possibilities. The sun hung high in the sky, casting long, warm shadows over the small town of Riverton. For two boys, Alex and David, the world was wide open, ready to be conquered. They had been inseparable since childhood, bound by an unspoken brotherhood. Their days were filled with laughter, mischief, and the kind of wild dreams only the young dare entertain. Alex was the charismatic one, always leading their adventures, and David, quieter but equally determined, followed willingly. They were two halves of a whole, the type of friends people envied. Riverton knew them as the golden duo, and everyone assumed that no force on earth could ever drive them apart. But life has a way of unraveling even the strongest bonds. It began, as most tragedies do, with something small, almost imperceptible. A missed call, a half-hearted smile, a secret shared with someone else. Alex had started hanging out with a new group of friends, a circle David didn't belong to. At first, David thought little of it. People grow, interests change. But the more Alex distanced himself, the more David felt like a ghost, haunting the edges of their once impenetrable friendship. Then came the betrayal. It was a night that had been meant to bring them together, a final summer party before they both left for college. David was nervous about the changes ahead, but he found solace in knowing that he and Alex would always have each other. That night, though, Alex was distant, lost in the crowd of new friends. David wandered the party, feeling like an outsider at an event where he was supposed to belong. The air was thick with music and laughter, but underneath it all, David felt something off. A tension, an unease. He tried to shake it, convincing himself that it was just his anxiety over the future. But as the night dragged on, he couldn't help but notice how Alex avoided him, how his eyes seemed to flicker with guilt whenever they met. At some point, David decided to leave, but as he was about to head out, he overheard voices in a nearby room. Alex's voice, and another, laughing, talking about him. David! Alex's voice was low, conspiratorial. He's just, I don't know, man. He clings to the past, you know? We've been friends forever, but I'm tired of it. He's not who I need around anymore. David froze. The words sliced through him like cold steel. His heart pounded, every beat echoing in his ears. He wanted to storm into the room, demand an explanation, but something held him back. Instead, he turned and left the party without a word. The night swallowed him, and with it, his faith in Alex. That was the night everything shattered. David never confronted Alex. He didn't need to. The betrayal had been so complete, so soul-deep, that words would only cheapen it. In the days that followed, Alex didn't try to explain, didn't reach out to apologize. Their friendship crumbled like dry leaves, swept away by the winds of time. David left for college and immersed himself in his studies, determined to rebuild his life without Alex. But the wound festered beneath the surface. He stopped trusting people, always expecting to be heard again. Friendships became superficial, relationships fleeting. The scar Alex left never fully healed. Years passed, and David carved out a life for himself. He was successful, outwardly content, but inside, the shadows of his past still lingered. He never thought about Alex, at least that's what he told himself. But in truth, he carried the weight of that betrayal everywhere he went. Then, one day, out of the blue, David received a message. "Hey, it's been a long time. Can we meet? I need to talk." It was from Alex. David stared at the message, unsure of how to feel. Anger, hurt, curiosity. They all swirled within him. What could Alex possibly want after all these years? Part of David wanted to ignore it, to leave the past where it belonged. But another part, the part that had never really let go, was intrigued. Against his better judgment, David agreed to meet. They met at a quiet café, far from the noise of the city. Alex looked older, the years having worn down the boyish charm he once flaunted. His eyes carried a heaviness, a remorse that David hadn't expected. For a moment, neither spoke, the weight of their shared history hanging in the air like a fog. "I'm sorry," Alex said at last, breaking the silence. His voice cracked slightly, betraying his composure. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, But I need you to hear me out. David said nothing, simply gesturing for Alex to continue. I messed up. I know I did. I hurt you, and I've regretted it every day since. I got caught up in trying to be someone I wasn't. I pushed you away because I thought it would make me happier. But it didn't. It made everything worse. I've lost so many people in my life, David, but losing you, he paused, swallowing hard. That's the one thing I can't move past. David felt the familiar sting of old wounds reopening. Part of him wanted to stand up and walk away, to let Alex feel the coldness he had once inflicted. But another part, the part that still remembered the friendship they once shared, wanted to listen, to understand. You broke my trust, David finally said, his voice quiet but steady. And you never tried to fix it. You left me to deal with it on my own. I know, Alex whispered, his eyes pleading. I know, and I hate myself for it. I've been thinking about it for years, trying to figure out how to make it right. But there's something you need to know. Something I didn't understand back then. David's brow furrowed in confusion. What are you talking about? Alex took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he reached into his pocket. He pulled out an old, worn letter and handed it to David. I found this after everything. I didn't know what it meant at first, but it's the reason I need you to hear me out. It changes everything. David unfolded the letter, his heart pounding as he read the words scrawled across the page. David's hands trembled as he held the letter, the paper worn from years of being handled. The handwriting was familiar, yet distant, as if it belonged to a different life. David, I don't know where to start or if you'll ever read this. By the time you do, I hope you understand why I did what I did. But if you don't, I'll try my best to explain here. The truth is, there were things going on back then that I couldn't tell you about. I didn't push you away because I wanted to, at least not in the way you think. I had to. I had to protect you, but I never had the courage to explain. You've probably figured out by now that I was falling into a bad crowd. What you don't know is how deep I got. They weren't just my friends. They were dangerous. I owed them, David. Owed them in a way that could have ruined everything for both of us. I had to make them believe I didn't care about anyone, especially not you, because if they knew how much you meant to me, they would have used you against me. That's why I said those things that night. That's why I let you walk away without stopping you. I hated every second of it, but I didn't see another way. I'm not saying this to excuse myself. I betrayed you, and I know that's something you'll never fully forgive. But I need you to know that it wasn't because I didn't care. It was because I cared too much. You were the best part of my life, David. And losing you was the price I paid to keep you safe. Alex watched as David's eyes scanned the letter, his expression unreadable. The words felt foreign to him, like a distorted version of the past he'd tried so hard to bury. He looked up, his gaze meeting Alex's for the first time since reading it. So, all of this, David began, his voice barely above a whisper, was because you thought you were protecting me? Alex nodded slowly. It wasn't just a thought, David. They would have hurt you. They threatened to if I didn't prove I was one of them. I got in too deep and I didn't see a way out. I made the worst decision of my life that night, thinking it would be the lesser of two evils. David felt a surge of emotions flooding through him. Anger, disbelief, and a painful kind of understanding. He had spent years thinking Alex's betrayal was a matter of selfishness, of ambition and ego. But now, hearing this, he wasn't sure what to feel. The wounds were real, the scars were deep, but the story was more complicated than he had ever imagined. You should have told me, David said, his voice harsher than he intended. You should have trusted me. Maybe I could have helped. I know, Alex replied, his voice thick with regret. I was scared. I was stupid. I thought pushing you away was the only way to keep you out of it. And by the time I realized how wrong I was, it was too late. They sat in silence for a long moment, the weight of the past hanging between them like a fog. David's mind raced, torn between the pain of betrayal and the revelation of Alex's truth. The years of hurt couldn't simply disappear, but there was something in Alex's eyes, something real, that made it hard to hold on to the anger. I don't know what to say, David finally admitted, leaning back in his chair. This changes everything, but at the same time, it doesn't. You still broke my trust. You still left me to deal with the fallout, alone. I know, Alex whispered, his voice small. I can't take back what I did. I can't make it right. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know the truth. I've been carrying it for so long, and I couldn't live with myself if I didn't at least try to explain. David stared at the table, his mind a swirl of emotions. How could he reconcile the boy he once knew with the man sitting in front of him now? How could he process that the person who had hurt him most had done it out of fear, out of a twisted sense of love? Do you think you were right? David asked suddenly, his voice sharp. Do you think it was worth it? Losing everything. Losing us. Was that worth keeping me safe? Alex shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. No, it wasn't worth it. I thought I was making the right choice back then, but I see now that I only made things worse. I lost my best friend, the one person who mattered most to me, and I've lived with that regret every single day. The café seemed to shrink around them, the hum of life outside distant and inconsequential. David's heart ached with the weight of it all. The lost years, the unanswered questions, the pain that had festered like an open wound. I don't know if I can forgive you, David said quietly, his words hanging in the air. But I appreciate that you told me the truth. Even if it doesn't fix anything, I needed to hear it. Alex nodded, swallowing hard. I understand. I'm sorry, David. For everything. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence was heavy, but there was a different quality to it now. One that wasn't as sharp or painful as it had been before. It was the silence of things unresolved, but not entirely broken. David looked out the window, watching the world go on outside, indifferent to the storm of emotions swirling inside the café. Could he ever truly forgive Alex? He wasn't sure. The scars of betrayal ran deep, and trust, once shattered, was nearly impossible to rebuild. But for the first time in years, David felt like there was room to breathe again, as if the weight of that night no longer pressed so heavily on his chest. I'm not ready to forget, David said finally, his voice firm but calm. But maybe someday I can try to forgive. For both of us. Alex's eyes filled with tears, a mix of relief and sorrow. He nodded, unable to find the words to respond, knowing that this was more than he had ever dared to hope for. They sat there a while longer, not as friends, not as enemies, but as two people bound by a shared past. The future was uncertain, and the road to redemption was long. But for the first time in years, there was a glimmer of something more. A faint hope that trust, though broken, could one day be mended. And perhaps, in time, the scars would fade, leaving behind not just the memory of pain, but also the strength to move forward. Together or apart, they would carry the lessons of their past, knowing that trust lost leaves a mark, but also knowing that, sometimes, even the deepest wounds can heal.